Okay, I will take back the screen. Thank you, Susan, for relinquishing.
Sure.
And now considering the timing, so the next thing on the agenda is to talk through PFAS. And I know some of you have been following this in detail. So as the last item on the agenda, I do not begrudge anybody who decides to leave at this point. But before we get to that, if you do decide to check out at some point during PFAS, because you've heard some of this before, kind of looking ahead, the summer schedule or into the fall, as you just heard, the Climate Change Subcommittee is meeting next week, June 29th. Data quality discussion, July 26th. If you're interested in that, send an email to bwsc.cam. Wayside cleanup office hours, the more informal 1 hour long get together to raise issues and sometimes have them answered, will be happening in the months in between the advisory committee meetings, the same fourth Thursday of the month, and the same time, 9 o'clock. The Zoom info is at that link, or just Google MassDEP office hours. And the next advisory committee meeting will be on Thursday, September 23rd, at 9 o'clock, and the links will be there. Obviously we're playing with Zoom webinar now. Next time we'll see what resources we have and what toys we'll be playing with. So don't just assume it's the same link, check back. And also included the link to the MassDEP meetings, events, and hearings, so that as we're playing along with other things going on in the department, you may want to check there. And I think that's really important, both what you just heard about the climate change and the kind of relationship between what Wayside Cleanup is trying to do and what other pieces of government and the private sector are trying to do. And it's all, we're trying to have coordinated efforts. We're trying not to reinvent the wheel. We're trying to borrow other people's wheels, rely upon their expertise, and figure out how we are fitting into, in the case of climate change, a larger national, global, statewide issue that affects the work that we do narrowly in wayside cleanup. And I think that's probably a good transition for PFAS into the PFAS world. Because similarly, there's a lot more going on with PFAS than just the fairly narrow and, I'm beginning to think, relatively straightforward world of PFAS and 21E and wayside cleanup. And so you may have heard either in office hours or past advisory committee meetings what wayside cleanup has been doing. So in the next few minutes, I'm going to talk a little bit about that, but I do want to focus as much on what is happening elsewhere in Massachusetts, and particularly within DEP, because some of those issues are going to kind of circle around back to us, and we're going to have to take into account in one way or another in discharge permits, in whether or not something is reportable because it might have a notification exemption because it's land application of biosolids or something. So there's a lot of work being done in a lot of different programs. And I rearranged some of the slides. This is how I was going to end. Basically, kind of to let you know the outcome, there are a lot of questions that still remain about PFAS that all of these DEP programs are struggling with in summary, what's out there, what's out in the environment and at what levels, where is it coming from, who is being exposed, and what can we do about it? And whether it's wayside cleanup trying to struggle with that, or the residuals program, or the air program, or the landfill program, and not just DEP, but the Department of Public Health, the Department of Agricultural Resources, the Office of Technical Assistance. Everybody is looking at PFAS and trying to kind of find out what pieces they are being responsible for and kind of what information they need and how all these pieces fit together. And having said that, the really good news is that the legislature's PFAS Interagency Task Force has started meeting. And I would highly recommend this, and I had thought I put a link to that. It might appear later. Oh yeah, there it is. This is a good page to bookmark for them. It's kind of hard to find them on the legislature's website, but this will have, as each meeting happens, the links to the recording of the hearing. You'll see that there is, oops, I thought that was live, never mind. There's a documents link. You can download the presentations that are made. So I would highly recommend this. And they are going to be looking at those broader, not only cross program, but cross agency issues dealing with PFAS, and hopefully provide guidance and resources and information that will help all of us do our jobs going into the future with that. So this, if you're going to do something during the summer, if you need something to relax while you're out on the beach, this would be a good videos to watch. So that was how I was going to end it. So if you bow out now, you've heard the punchlines. We all hopefully know what PFAS is by this point, but because this is being recorded and there may be people are coming, or there may be people listening now who are not familiar with it, the basic points are man-made chemicals. They don't go away. They are useful, incredibly useful products, and thus they're very widespread. And you find them in everything from firefighting foams to ski waxes and food containers, and we have been exposed for many decades to these materials. And the good news is generally that our exposures have been going down as documented by PFAS levels in the blood, but they're still used in consumer products. They're still particularly imported products where even some of the longer chain chemicals of more concern. And as more research is done on the toxicology of these chemicals, where there are more and more concerns about low-level exposures to them. And these are a family of compounds that number in the thousands. Different variations on the number of carbons, the number of fluorines, and the functional groups at the end. And there are questions about how they interact, what is the cumulative impact of exposure to all of these. And we had started out several years ago thinking the longer chain ones are really bad, the shorter chain ones are not as bad, but we're still figuring out they might not be quite as bad, but how bad are they and how much of concern should we have? So there are a lot of things to be worried about, and it's still a moving target. And your exposures are coming from all over the place. And the kind of the biggest point of this graphic, not just to scare people and make them concerned, is that it's not just the wayside cleanup program. It's not just the drinking water program. There are a number of agencies involved in it, and really, in order to lower the exposure overall, all of the agencies and stakeholders involved kind of in all of these different aspects have to take steps to reduce the overall exposure. Otherwise, in wayside cleanup, if we take it out of the groundwater and we put it into a landfill, it doesn't help, in the grand scheme of thing, if the landfill leaches and it gets into the leachate, which then goes into the wastewater treatment plant, which then gets out into the river, and it can cycle through the environment in many ways that are still being figured out. So you can't take them in isolation, and they are very hard to permanently get rid of. We've been working on this for a number of years, going back to, certainly they've been identified as emerging contaminants. I was just looking at a slide from 2008 where we talked about emerging contaminants, and PFOA was listed there as well. It wasn't as highly prioritized in 2008 as in retrospect, perhaps we should have. And things came to a head with the unregulated contaminant monitoring rule from the EPA for drinking water, public water supplies, which did occurrence monitoring and let us know kind of in general at a higher detection limit really than we're looking at now, but the occurrence of these materials across the country in drinking water supplies. And steadily since then, We have been regulating it or addressing it first through health advisories and ORS guidelines, and then in December 2019, the Wayside Cleanup Program issued its soil and groundwater standards and notification, notifiable concentrations. The Drinking Water Program came out with an MMCL last year of 20 parts per trillion. So there's a steady increase in focus on regulation of these materials. And this is another slide I hate because it's hard to put all of this in perspective. But one of the things that people certainly are aware of is different states are dealing with these differently. And rather than look at that slide, I think of it in this way. There are really 4 quadrants and 2 factors that we're concerned about. One is the toxicity, and what is the appropriate target level? How low can it go? What's the appropriate level? And we're talking parts per trillion. And then the other question is, how do you deal with the numerous types of PFAS, the different chemicals? And you can deal with them individually or in small groups or in larger groups. So in the upper left-hand corner, you have EPA's approach, which a lot of states have adopted, which is regulating 2 PFAS compounds, PFAS and PFOA, at 70 parts per trillion combined. From there, that's kind of the starting point in my mind. From there, you could use that same toxicity concept, toxicology, and apply it to a larger group of chemicals, 5 or 6 or more. Or you can look at more recent information, and a number of states, federal agencies have done this, and apply more stringent toxicology, if you will, adopt more stringent toxicity values. So the level of concern goes down, but you're still regulating them on either individual chemical basis or a small number of chemicals. And then you have the 4th box, which is more stringent toxicology applied to a larger group. And that's how it plays out. And that's kind of where we stand now. This is that other table, but kind of in those terms. You have EPA and a number of states that are still looking at the PFAS, PFOA at 70 parts per trillion. And then you have a couple states like Massachusetts and Vermont that have applied more stringent toxicity values and are regulating a larger group of chemicals. But you see there are a lot of states that have gone the path in ATSDR of looking at individual chemicals and a more stringent value. And you see individual standards or criteria for individual PFAS compounds, in the 6 to 45, 50 parts per trillion range, depending upon what how they're interpreting that. So it's going to take a while for all this to shake out. You certainly see a lot more movement at the state level because we are a little bit more nimble than the federal government. Speaking as a bureaucrat, I understand why your larger programs, larger ships take a longer time to turn. And it's heartening to hear that EPA is putting a lot more focus on PFAS and making commitments to study and make changes as necessary. And there'll likely be a lot more movement on PFAS from EPA over the next months and years. So we're all anxious to see that because more information is better. We've talked about the MCP and what we've done in setting up the reportable concentrations, which I think is the biggest thing, plus the Method 1 standards for the PFAS compounds. The Drinking Water Program implemented their standard in October, very similarly. What we're doing under the MCP, I view it as we're trying to normalize things. We have reportable concentrations. We've put out guidance on kind of when and where people really should be looking at for PFAS, doing their due diligence, recommending certainly people keep up to speed as much as possible on what's coming out and acting appropriately. And we have seen a number of sites coming in through the RC pathway, them notifying us and then going through the MCP process. So that's great to see. Wayside Cleanup has been providing assistance to the other DEP programs as well in a number of ways. But a lot of what we've been doing is site or source discovery as a result of the drinking water program identifying public or private water supplies that have been affected by PFAS. And while the drinking water program figures out, working with the water suppliers, trying to figure out how to minimize the exposure or eliminate the exposure in that public water supply, waste site cleanup then looks back in the other direction, trying to find the source of the contaminants, where it's coming from, and in dealing with that. We have a number of large sites. Many of them are affiliated with the Department of Defense. There are also a number of sites as a result of state or local firefighting or fire training that has gone on. Airports are certainly a potential source because of their use of AFFF, both for responding to incidents and training at the airports. And there are a number of smaller number of commercial or industrial sources that we've been dealing with. And I had to add to this list, there are a number of unknown sources where we're still working on trying to figure out where the material is coming from and what levels. We've been working as part of the source reduction, trying to get the worst material out of circulation. We implemented with our friends at the Department of Fire Services, Department of Public Safety, a take-back program where we went around and disposed of the older legacy AFFF foam. We've also been working with the Connecticut DEP on a project to sample foams that claim to be fluorine-free as well. And we're also working on a project looking at kind of the steps that would be necessary to adequately decontaminate the tanks that the firefighters used that had previously been filled with the bad AFFF. And when they do want to switch it out, to make sure that the tanks are adequately and appropriately decontaminated, because we have had instances of substantial cross-contamination here. It's not cleaned out and you can still get too much of the legacy material in the new foam. So all of those projects are ongoing. What other people are doing, the drinking water program put out their standard. Of course, there is no federal standard, only a health advisory right now. In addition to having the MCL, the actual number, which is what a lot of people focus on, kind of an important part of the drinking water regulations is the monitoring requirements that now apply to the public water suppliers and what they have to look for, what the target chemicals are, how they look at what the analytical methods are, et cetera, et cetera. We're tracking all of the scientific developments, and there's a commitment by the department and the drinking water program in particular to regularly revisit this MCL and review and revise it as appropriate. I believe that was going to be on there. It's like in every 3 or 5 years, I'll make sure I add that to it, but it's on a routine basis that we've committed to reviewing it. The MCLs apply to this MCL applies to community water systems. It does not apply to the transient non-community water systems, the TNCs. There is a sampling requirement, but the actual MCL does not apply to them because they're transient systems. So the MCL is based upon consistent exposure to that water, drinking 2 liters of water per day over an extended period of time. For the transient non-community systems, that exposure isn't relevant. But what the drinking water program will do when we find hits of PFAS or any contaminant in a TNC, they will refer that to our Office of Research and Standards, and they will look at a risk assessment looking at more appropriate exposures for that. So these wells do get evaluated, but the MCL itself is not necessarily applicable. there is money available from a variety of different pots to help water suppliers out, public water suppliers, when and if they do find PFAS. There is never enough money to do it. There's not enough money in our budget. There's not enough budget to provide funding for everybody to do what is needed, but there is money available to help out with that. And hopefully that's one of the other things that the Interagency Task Force will be looking at, is what resources are needed, both at the state level, but also for the communities that are dealing with this. The Clean Water Trust is offering 0% interest loans, and over $180 million have gone out already for 16 projects. So there is substantial amounts of money. More is needed, but there's money out there. We are trying to be as transparent as possible in all of this. There's a lot of sampling being done for public water supplies. The state has resources to provide funding for the first round of sampling for them. And we have on the webpage, and there's a link there, Story Map, which is a way of making this information available, list of the systems that are above 20 parts per trillion, and you can click on those and get more information for each of those as well. So you can see 582 systems have tested so far, and it's running a little bit less than 10% of the systems are coming up with results greater than 20 parts per trillion. So it gives you an indication of the magnitude of the problem we're dealing with, that everybody is dealing with. We're doing a similar thing with private wells, offering a private well testing program, targeting the 84 communities that are substantially reliant on private wells for their water supplies. And so far, about 1,500 homeowners have applied, and we're working our way through those systems. The vast majority of the results are less than the 20 parts per trillion. These are the list of the towns that we're focusing on, and we're working our way through those. There's a similar story map available through that link that shows you the towns that have started up the sampling, the towns that are eligible but have not yet started. As we work our way through them, you can click on the right, there's a list of towns that have received results. You can click on that. You can also click on any individual town on the map and a little box will pop up. I clicked on Carlisle. I don't know if you can see this, guys, but the pop-up box says Carlisle has been selected to participate, blah, 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 blah. PFAS sampling has begun. Wells sampled 18, results received over the MCL 5. For available results, or see the results tab, or click here. So it gives you an indication of what we're finding in each of these communities. To the extent possible, we're trying to maintain the privacy and anonymity of the people receiving the results, so you're not going to see the addresses, but it gives you a sense of where we're finding things, and then where waste site cleanup is one of the things, like I said, we're doing is following up, trying to find out what's there, where it's coming from, where it's going, what can be done about it. PFAS and wastewater. There's monitoring being done for at wastewater treatment plants. We're looking forward to having, there's a lot of work being done in the analytical arena, moving beyond drinking water to soil and wastewater and other materials. That's part of what is one of the limiting factors in all of the work that's being done, is to what extent do you have confidence in the analytical results, and to what extent there are standard methods, et cetera. So a lot of work being done in wastewater, if it's coming out of the wastewater treatment plants, they will be focused, into the future on what's going into the wastewater treatment plants. EA's Office of Technical Assistance is working, with industrial potential industrial sources of PFAS, and trying to find out ways of minimizing, reducing what's going into the wastewater treatment plants. Again, in order to prevent the overall cycling of these materials through our different systems, we have to look at ways of removing it or preventing it to be getting in to begin with. Residuals, again, what's coming out of wastewater treatment plants. A lot of our residuals from wastewater is used as fertilizer. If the residuals contain PFAS, land applying them out there in the environment, where material might leach to the groundwater, contaminating the underlying groundwater supply. There are potential exposures to the soil itself. And then there's a whole food chain pathway that is being explored. A lot of these materials are used on farms. There are cases, there's one that's being studied a lot in Maine, where residuals had been used. There's also contaminated groundwater. There's materials in the hay. There are cows grazing. There's PFAS in the milk. So trying to get a better understanding of what all the factors are that contribute to this has been the focus. We're working with the stakeholders that are involved, both at a programmatic level and at a technical level, and trying to come up with alternatives and directions for our residuals program. So there's more work there, working on leachate models, trying to establish screening levels of some way of looking at and getting a better understanding of what's in the residuals, how they're being used, and how they can be managed in a way to minimize any potential future exposures. Surface waters, you see it just going down program by program by program. DEP has been partnering with the Geological Survey, sampling rivers in Massachusetts for 24 PFAS compounds. They're looking upstream and downstream of wastewater treatment facilities and downstream of industrial areas. Samples have been collected, and we're expecting the results to be published sometime in the near future, probably in the next couple of months. That will be interesting. Another interesting thing, PFAS and pesticides. And you may have heard of this, the Anvil 10+10 that had been used for spraying for mosquitoes last year because of EEE. The peer environmental responsibility, public employees for environmental responsibility tested samples and identified high levels in the pesticide. DEP did a bunch of testing of the pesticides. We sent our information to EPA. They joined in, and the end result of all of that work was identifying that the PFAS was coming from the containers, and it was not part of the formulation of the pesticides itself. So they have been switching, and a lot of the material is now coming and planned to be used for the upcoming spraying season is in PFAS-free containers and being sampled to demonstrate that. And we've been working closely with the Department of Agricultural Resources in all of this to make sure that what we're doing is safe, healthy, appropriate, et cetera, but and certainly balancing all of those risks. So that was a quick overview, and I rather than the details of any of it, I think what I wanted to leave you with all of this is the impression that there's a lot of work being done. We are trying desperately to keep up with the science and keep up with the issues and do it in a coordinated way. So it's not just one program struggling with it, but also not one program going off and creating precedents, if you will, that we're trying to look at how all of these pieces fit together. And it's both challenging and interesting, but frustrating because you're coordinating with a lot of people, and the pace may be not as quick as you would always want if you were working on your own. But it is fascinating. So that's what I have.
Given how pervasive this is through all the programs, I'm surprised that Western and Northeast regions don't also have a PFAS branch set up as well.
Well, yeah, it's they probably will eventually, and for those DP staff from the Northeast and Western region listening in, that's not predictive in any way. But what we're finding is it's being driven by what we're finding in the water supplies, and the Northeast is reliant on if you just take the MWA communities out, that's a large part of it. And MWA water has been tested and does not exceed the standard for PFAS. So I think it's just where we have found our sites so far. But as we do a lot more of the private well sampling out in the Western region, that's probably going to lead to more sites and more questions and more need for more staff time. The Northeast region, ironically, when we started the private well sampling, the first hits that we got were in the Northeast region. And so they are acquiring more sites. And as that moves, we will certainly evaluate kind of how best to structure DEP staff to make sure that we have the resources available.
Paul,
Yes.
Paul, can I chime in for a second?
Sure.
I live in one of the municipalities in which the drinking water exceeds the MCL.
Mm-hmm.
I received the required notice, like all of my neighbors, in my mailbox, advising me of that and also telling me that bottled water was available. That was also published on the post-September 11th hazard communication electronic billboard in the center of town. And that's where the communication ended. The municipalities are, in my opinion, completely ill-equipped to have conversations with their residents about about the hazard here and the hazard in context, as you indicated in your slides. And I note that your presentation has a lot of detail about efforts to find PFAS and efforts to deal with them when they're found, but there was nothing in the presentation about DEP playing a more meaningful role on helping communities talk to the public about the risks presented by PFAS in drinking water in the broader context that you presented. And I think this is probably within my role as a member of the advisory committee, but DEP is the source of the regulatory requirement. And I think the requirement carries with it a responsibility to be dedicating resources to helping the citizens of the Commonwealth affected understand this risk in the context of all of the risks that they face from PFAS and from other things.
I agree. And the slides didn't go into any detail on the communication aspects, and which we are putting a lot of resources in. I know our regional staff in particular, and in the drinking water program specifically, are working very closely with the public water suppliers in the communities on the outreach and the public notices that are required under the drinking water regulations and the additional outreach that might occur. What in my seat, kind of watching some of this and sitting in on meetings where we talk about that, what has struck me is that there is a wide range of reaction from the local communities on how they deal with it as well. And DEP has resources. We have, I am amazed at the number of fact sheets that our drinking water program has for like every variation on the theme and for every potential stakeholder. They are very thorough and having materials ready and available should the towns want to use them, and offering to attend public meetings and speak about it. But we can't force them to do it. So I think you see a wide range of experience. Some communities want to send out the notice and that's it. They don't want to dwell on the fact that there's the problem. Other communities have had extensive public meeting, several public meetings, have had us, and the Department of Public Health often comes to participate to answer questions. I've been at Board of Health meetings, a number of them related to contamination of public water supplies, to be part of the DEP team that's there to look at it from the wayside cleaner perspective, to look at it from the water supply perspective. And so it's frustrating, but it sometimes the community municipalities' response is not as full as it could be.
Paul, I guess my reaction to that is, again, it's a state regulation. It's not a municipal bylaw that's at issue. And so, for example, when you have, for example, risks presented by a pandemic, the state is perfectly comfortable imposing, speaking directly to residents in municipalities about what should be appropriate, what is safe, what isn't safe in the individual municipalities of the Commonwealth. And to me, given the widespread nature of this, as you've alluded, not just from drinking water, but from all of the other things that you say PFAS come from, including consumer products, it's no more inappropriate for DEP to be speaking directly to the citizens of the Commonwealth about PFAS than it is for them to be speaking directly to the citizens of the Commonwealth about COVID-19.
True, and to some extent, in what we put on the website and we have available, we are trying to speak to everybody, make information available. I think there is, I don't recall a situation where we have set up public meetings or had direct communication with citizens where the municipality doesn't want to participate. Our first choice and our preferred method is to work with the local community and provide them the resources and access to our information and work with them. It doesn't come off well, and problems arise when you have different agencies or different arms of government either working at cross purposes or having different messages. It's far better to try to coordinate, and I think that has been the focus. I can't help it. Can you touch on the status of whether to test residential commercial septic areas for PFAS and report? Well, I think one of the things that, certainly we're interested in what might be associated with septic systems. And I think that's one of the purposes of the private well testing, to see what's out there in areas that have both drinking water supplies and septic systems. Generally our material coming out of a, functioning and proper septic systems, are not typically a 21E issue. I don't know whether the Title V program has anything specific for PFAS sampling. I can find out kind of what research is going on there. But I think at the moment we're using the private well sampling as a way to get a lot of the data that may give us an indication of whether the septic systems are problematic or not. Mike Litton asks, has there been discussion regarding setting PFAS surface water discharge levels for remediation treatment systems? And I think that's probably coming. Certainly on a case-by-case basis. I know of at least one NIPDES permit that took PFAS into account and required pre-treatment before discharge to the surface water. That was at the former South Weymouth Naval Air Station. So as all of these programs will begin taking into account one way or another. I'm not going to speculate kind of what direction we'll go. Sorry if I missed it, but who represents MassDEP on the PFAS task force? Commissioner Martin Suberg. Is there a date for the next task force meeting? I know that they have the date set. I would look at the documents or the first part of the first video. I know they talked about the dates. And then at the end of that video, they also corrected one of the dates because they're always Tuesdays. Keep that in mind. They mentioned one date that's not a Tuesday, and then they went back and corrected it. But they will be happening fairly frequently throughout the summer. I don't think every week, but several during the summer and into September. And the schedule is out. In the future, will Massachusetts continue to add more chemicals to the group of PFAS to which the current MCL applies, or will higher allowable concentrations be applied to a larger group of chemicals? Do you envision a new separate MCL for other PFAS groupings? Thank you, anonymous attendee. And so the answer is, I have no idea. But you asked, do I envision? So as a private citizen, I think the most logical thing would be to regulate PFAS as a group. And I say that with all of our experience looking at PCBs, for example. While there are situations where we look at very specific PCBs, we usually talk about them and deal with them and regulate them as a family rather than individual compounds. And so we have experience, whether it's PCBs or dioxins, or in the drinking water realm, total trihalomethanes. We have experience dealing with groups of chemicals, regulating them as a group where they have similar toxicities or similar mobilities. They act the same way in either because of toxicology or in the environment. It makes sense to do it that way. I think it's the kind of the other extreme of regulating each and every one individually. I think I'm not sure that DEP or the federal government have the resources to do that and keep up. There are just so many of them out there. So I think as a practical matter, some grouping of the materials would be appropriate. The other thing I look at is kind of as an example would be our VPH EPH approach, where we are using fractions of these ranges of chemicals to regulate the masses of the material. We don't focus, except for certain ones. We have target analytes, but we also use those fractional ranges to regulate the mass of compounds that exhibit similar toxicity. So you could look at that model in PFAS and think, well, are there ways of breaking up those families of PFAS in ways where you can group similar toxicities or similar mobilities or whatever it is you're concerned about, and maybe not regulate PFAS as one big family, but are there ways of breaking it up into groups that you're concerned about for a particular reason, like we did for VPH and EPH, or regulate them like we do with dioxin, where you have toxic equivalencies. A way of is a different way of managing it. So there are a variety of different ways. I would not I wouldn't rule out regulating them as bigger or smaller groups or multiple groups of chemicals, because that is one of the tools that we have available for dealing with them.
Paul,
yeah.
I'm really encouraged that you said that. I know you said it as a private citizen and not from DEP, but I've been advocating for this for years. Back when we had the public meetings for concern about PFAS in our drinking water supply, 2018, 2019, continue to advocate publicly for regulating PFAS as a class, because we can't possibly know the toxicities or put numbers on these thousands of compounds, branched, unbranched, et cetera. So I'm encouraged that you, at least as a private citizen, can consider that that's an approach that's technically valid and viable. I know there are groups in the country now that are looking at that approach. I was wondering if ORS was doing any investigation or research on that approach, and if not, would love to have that conversation with them.
Well, I don't know how much their resources they're expending towards that right now. I do know that they are, like many of our other groups, kind of overwhelmed by the different aspects of PFAS that they're dealing with. And because of ORS's unique position in the department, they are highly involved in, you know, that entire list of projects that I quickly went through and more. So we'll see what comes of it. I think, you know, at some point for us, there will probably come a time when we are either putting out new regulations or revising the ones that we already have, with the question of you know, what direction should we expand the group? Should we kind of pull back and look at them individually? Is there some mix? I think that will be relevant, but I don't think it's our primary focus right now. Right now, I think we're partly, a lot of us are trying to deal with the effects of putting out regulations and the implications of them. And then other groups are looking at the new regulations for their programs or new approaches. The other thing I was going to point out when I went over all of the other states and what people are doing is that we are lucky that we have a group of toxicologists that work, you know, for DEP that gives us the ability to kind of ask questions like that and answer them. Other states, that group would be in the Department of Public Health, and there's kind of another layer of coordination that has to occur. And then there are a lot of states that don't have those resources at all. So when you look at that chart with, you know, the different states that are doing different things, I think what you're seeing is, you know, what are the states that have independent resources to ask and answer those questions. And we're lucky because we have an office dedicated to that. We're also lucky that we are in a community that has stakeholders, you know, academics and others who are willing to participate in this process and help out as well. So big shout out to, you know, ORS and everybody that helps them do what they do.
So along those lines, it's Wendy, if I can just respond to this question or this comment. There are a number of initiatives going on and a number of really interesting and research. And it might be that there's a way to do this in a more systematic way, right? To pull in the groups that are doing this research, both on the toxicology, the epi side, and the, you know, the work, for example, that Elsie Sunderland has been doing, and figure out how to become more efficient at moving that science to, so that ORS doesn't have to go finding it, but making it available.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the issues that the interagency task force will also be dealing with, among many others. But,
oh yeah.
I'm an optimist, Wendy.
It's been a long time, Paul.
Good things are going to be coming. Yeah, I am very optimistic by the kind of attention that it is getting and the recognition that, you know, it's something that everybody is struggling with. So, so I have high hopes for the task force and what might come out of it. Okay, and that is that. We still have 41 attendees. Thank you for sticking with that, and all of the advisory committee members. Thank you all for coming. any questions you have, follow up from that, certainly let us know. Anything, things can go either to us individually or the bwsc.information@mass.gov email box for all of you listening. And then we'll be back the 4th Thursday in July for office hours and informal follow-up or new questions. So any other thoughts or things before we leave? Comments, suggestions? Nobody.
Thanks for doing this again, Paul. I'm glad you were able to work out the technical difficulties.
Yeah, well, let us know kind of your thoughts on how the technical aspects of all of this work. We do eventually want to get to a point where we're meeting at least partly face to face, but we do want to maintain the remote aspects as well. We had been doing that, as you know, before COVID when we were live streaming on YouTube. The good news is the technology has made this so much easier. I had far less anxiety today, even with my spotty internet connection. But moving ahead, I think once they build out the Salt and Salt building and we move from our 1 Winter Street headquarters, I think the new meeting rooms are going to have better AV equipment that will allow us to do this, the mix of live and streamed. So we're going to, this will be developing as we go ahead, but I don't think, we definitely don't want to lose the potential for the wider outreach that we have by doing it remotely. So let us know how you found it and whether it worked for you and any suggestions you might have. And otherwise, have a good beginning of the summer.
Well,
Thank you all. Stay well.
Yeah.
Thanks, you too.